There's a Supreme Court case that you probably haven't heard about that just had oral arguments that's a really big deal. The case is called Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo, and it's a huge deal because it's contemplating overturning what is called the Chevron Doctrine, which has been an essential component of administrative law for the last 40 years. The Chevron Doctrine has basically allowed the agency experts in our administrative agencies like the EPA or the DEA to set rules and regulations rather than relying on the court system or Congress to do it for them. The basic idea is this: if Congress passes a law but is silent or ambiguous on a specific point of regulation or authority, then Chevron has allowed the executive agencies to step in and create that determination instead. The caveat is that the agency cannot make the rules so out of whack with what Congress intended that it is determined by courts to be arbitrary and capricious. But otherwise, agencies have pretty wide latitude in how they set these rules and regulations. For example, let's say that Congress passes a law that says that anyone who is, quote, in poverty deserves and should receive a housing stipend. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is presumably the agency that would be tasked with administering this law, then has to determine, what does in poverty actually mean? Does it mean the federal poverty line? Does it mean some other metric based on comments from the public and the experts that are in the housing industry? The Chevron Doctrine would allow the Department of Housing and Urban Development to come to this number on their own. Again, so long as the number is not arbitrary and capricious. This makes sense, right? After all, Congress can't do every single little detail. I mean, right now they can barely get anything done. So if we were to require them to be this specific, our government would have a lot of trouble functioning. But at the same time, there are consequences to the Chevron system that people don't like. First of all, it's excusing Congress from doing the meaningful legislative work of being more detailed when they pass a law or legislation that require regulations and rules. When Congress knows that government can basically function fine without them because Chevron will take care of it, then they're going to just be a little bit lazier, and that's just natural incentives at work. And second, because the executive agencies themselves are coming up with these rules, it creates a system where, depending on the administration in power, the rules can change wildly from one administration to the next. For example, if we were to go back to that housing stipend example, President Biden can say that in poverty is all the way up here. But then Trump gets elected, and then his Department of Housing and Urban Development says that that number is all the way down here. That sort of inconsistent rulemaking and regulation creates a lot of chaos in governance. The Chevron Doctrine has been under attack by conservative jurists for years because they have claimed that this decision is violating the separation of powers doctrine and excusing Congress from doing its job of actually legislating. And for the first time in decades, based on the makeup of the Supreme Court, it is possible that Chevron could be done away with entirely. And if it is, this is going to be a rough landing for our government. Our executive agencies will no longer be confident when they set rules and regulations because they know now that courts will be breathing down their neck, ready to strike down anything that they think is outside the scope of their authority. And to be clear, without Chevron, they would not have that much authority. Loads of existing regulations and rules that were crafted by experts in various fields, from science to technology to mathematics, would all potentially be struck down by the court system. And Congress, which in the last few decades has struggled to get even the bare minimum work done to keep our government running, would suddenly now be tasked with getting a lot more done in every facet of our society in order to keep it running. Maybe that kick in the rear is exactly what they need to wake up and start doing their job. Or maybe overturning Chevron would be a disaster and cause our government to be even more incompetent and chaotic than it historically already has been. I'll keep you posted on how this case develops.